So it's the study of decision making. That's actually true of all economics, but it is about decision making. It's informed not just by economics, but by psychology. And it takes into account observed behavior, not theoretical behavior, but observed behavior of how people are actually making decisions. So it's decision making, psychology is part of it, and it's based on observed instead of idealized behavior. So in the real world, you have a finite amount of information. You have a finite amount of time to make a decision, either because the clock is ticking or because you're losing interest. There is limited brain power. You can't do all the math in your head. So you're making comparisons, but they're sort of sloppy. So that inability to compare jam jar number 1 with jam jar number 2, then jam jar number 1 with jam jar number 3, then 1 with 4. There's too many choices. So that was why I went about buying the car using the tools of bounded rationality and fundamentally trying to come up with a decision that was good enough. Maybe not perfect, maybe not the most efficient choice, but one that was good enough. So perfect rationality, to use a term that was coined by, I think, Herb Simon from Carnegie Mellon half a century ago. Bounded rationality says, the time you spend searching, that has a cost to it, and you have to include that in your implicit cost benefit analysis. You also should take into account that getting close enough is really good enough. You don't have to hit it exactly on the perfect number if you're within a very tight band. So maybe good enough is good enough. And the term for that is satisficing. So when we put these two side by side, they're both caricatures in a sense. They're both extreme descriptions, and all of us as people are, in some sense, a mix of them. So we have these two caricatures, but they map really closely to the ideas that Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner Daniel Kahneman, laid out when he described our two ways of thinking fast and thinking slow. And ironically, thinking fast is what Homer does, which is to say he acts without really consciously thinking. And thinking slow is thinking rationally, carefully, going through all the alternatives. When you look at the elements of thinking fast, well, it's fast, it's automatic, it's intuitive. Examples of that are when you're driving a car. You're not making calculations about how far the car in front of you is, or when you need to turn the turn signal on, or will you hit that bicycle. There's so much that is almost automatic or intuitive in our head. And it is in some sense effortless. And for better or worse, when things are going fast, we're not even asking ourselves, is this good or is this bad? We're not doubting ourselves. So thinking fast is really useful in some situations where you've done it a million times, situations where the cost of screwing up isn't that high, or just things that are basically in our animal brains when we're estimating whether the Leaning Tower of Pisa is leaning farther over and gonna tumble. Those sorts of intuitive decisions are analyses, are instances of what we're calling system 1 thinking. We contrast those with system 2 thinking slow, which is conscious, which is conscience. It's also cautious. It's analytical. It is, as Spock would say, logical, but it's also costly. And when we say costly, you actually are using much more blood flow in your brain when you're doing that kind of thinking. When you're doing hard math problems in your head, you really are burning more calories than when you're making quick intuitive decisions. This description of thinking fast and slow goes back certainly to the Greek philosophers and even the pre-Socratics. So the notion that humans both make quick intuitive snap judgments and also thoughtful, careful, weigh the alternative kinds of decisions, we've always known this about people. What behavioral economics is trying to do is to put a little meat on the bones of this distinction and make it not just an observation of how complicated people are, but rather a framework for understanding how we make decisions and when we can do a better job making some versus others.